Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world, it's a massive pleasure to be with you today, along with Dr. David Hillson, the risk doctor.
Hi, Phil. It's
And
good to be with you too.
thank you, David. It's good to be together again. And today we are going to be talking about a topic regarding the current lockdown. The lockdown has lifted in some parts of the United States, but in many parts of the world, is still in some form of lockdown. And the coronavirus pandemic has affected the entire world with over 5.6 million confirmed cases, 355,000 deaths so far and rising, which is very disturbing. This has affected the health of individuals, the viability of many businesses, and the economies of nations. Most countries introduced some form of lockdown as a response to the pandemic, and the majority of people have complied with the rules, even though they found it hard. As a result, the rate of infection has reduced in many countries, and so have the number of deaths. Now, governments are announcing an easing of restrictions, letting people out of lockdown under certain circumstances. As we prepare to emerge from lockdown, are there any insights from the world of risks, David, to help us decide what we should and shouldn't do?
Well, I think there are, Phil, and thanks for this opportunity just to share some ideas. As you know, I think risk management has the answer to everything, which isn't perhaps surprising, being the risk doctor. But I think if we take a risk-based perspective on this question of how we emerge from lockdown, it will help us just to clarify some of the key things to think about as we decide for ourselves as individuals, for our businesses, if we're either running or owning a business or just employed by a business. And then wider, I'd like to think a little bit about our societies and our nations. And I think there's a lot that that the risk perspective can give to us as we address these questions. My wife actually is she comes from a farming family in the east of England, and they had a dairy herd. And one of her favorite times of year was in the spring when the cattle have been locked up in the barns all through the winter. And then there comes a day in spring when the farmer lets the cows out onto the fresh, lush spring pasture. And you see these great big animals and they come rushing out of the barn and they dance and skip like lambs. It's just incredible because they're so happy to be released from lockdown. And I just wonder if some of us are going to be like those cows on the first spring morning out into the pasture. We're going to rush out so delighted to be free. Or maybe we're going to kind of come out blinking, like we're emerging from some cave with long beards and long hair. And we're not quite sure what we're finding. And, I think there's going to be a lot of different ways that people, individuals and businesses and societies emerge from lockdown. And I'd just like to see if we can put some framing questions around the way that we might move forward from a risk-based perspective.
Absolutely, David. So, the way risk professionals would see this is obviously very different. So, is there any structure that you can give us to focus how best to maneuver ourselves in at this time? Because to be quite honest with you, I'm still on lockdown mentally
Right.
and physically to a large degree. So, can you give some structure to help guide my thinking and others?
Yeah, I hope I can, Phil. I remember we said in our conversation a couple of days ago that where you are in Arizona, the state has actually allowed people to go out, but you're staying home. And I was talking to a friend, I just met him at lunchtime today. We were walking 10 feet apart. He was walking in the middle of the street, would you believe? Because there's no
Oh, wow.
cars at the moment. And he's really, really nervous. And he said, he hasn't been into a shop for 10 weeks. He goes out once a day to walk, but he walks as far away as possible from people. And I
Wow.
think these sort of decisions about how much we want to expose ourselves, where we want to go, what we want to do, these are risk decisions. And so what I'd like to do in this short discussion that we're having is first of all to see if we can put some framing questions together, the sort of questions that we ought to be asking ourselves. And once we've got the set of questions, the framework, then maybe we can talk about how we could apply those both individually as we come out under from personal lockdown, but also from the business and the societal perspectives. So I've got 7 questions that I think we should all be asking, which will help us to understand what's the right way to proceed.
Okay. All right. So I'm guessing these questions are they structured towards some overarching framework, or are they more like organic questions that everyday humans can understand?
Well, both, Phil. I mean, as you know, risk management is just a life skill. And one of the things I like to do in my work is to try and simplify some of these complex concepts and use natural language. So what I want to suggest is that the questions that we ask are just natural questions that the normal person in the street would want to answer. But then we're going to put them in a kind of risk flavor so we can see how we address them from a risk-based perspective. So as you know, all risks are defined in relation to objectives. And so it won't surprise you to know that the first question that we have to address is, what am I trying to do? What are my goals? What am I trying to achieve as I emerge from lockdown? And
Okay.
that's going to be different for different individuals, for different businesses, and for different societies. But if we don't have a clear objective and we just rush out like those cows dancing in the field, we'll be running all over the place, and we won't be having a kind of focused approach to moving out of lockdown. So we'll come back to some examples in a moment about what that might mean for individuals, businesses, and societies. But the first key question is, what am I trying to do? What am I trying to achieve? And then the second question, which comes naturally from that, is how much risk am I prepared to take whilst I'm pursuing these goals? So how do I want to be really cautious as I move towards those goals, or am I just going to go for it and see what happens because I'm desperate to achieve these goals? So
Gotcha.
and there's a risk jargon term for how much risk you're prepared to take in order to achieve your goals.
Right, right.
I bet you know what that jargon term is, Phil.
I use it all the time. That sounds like risk appetite.
Risk appetite, exactly. It's an amount of risk that you're prepared to take. Now, we wouldn't call it risk appetite talking to my friend walking in the middle of the street, or to someone with a business deciding whether to bring his team back from what we call furlough here, back to work. But
Right.
that's the key question. How much risk am I prepared to take once I move towards these goals? And once you've got that in mind, then the third question that we need to answer is, how much risk can I cope with? And the term we use for this is risk capacity. So you might say, I'm prepared to spend whatever it takes to get my business back on the road. That's your kind of risk appetite. But really, if you've only got $50,000 in the bank, that's your risk capacity. That's all you can spend. And if it takes you 60 or 70 or 100,000 or $1 million to get back on the road with your business, then you have a different question to ask. Have I got the right objectives? Do I need to take another risk, like taking on a loan, for example?
Right.
But of course, now we're getting into some of the examples. But so the question is, first of all, what do I want to do? And second, how much risk am I prepared to take? And then thirdly, how much risk can I cope with as I come out of lockdown and move towards my goals? And
Right.
then
And
the fourth question. So go ahead. Yeah.
this is different on many levels in different countries. So here in the United States, I mean, you know how health insurance is. I mean, it costs an arm and a leg, whereas in the United Kingdom, I mean, the government's helping you out. So the capacity here for health related stuff is very different from what you guys
Exactly.
over there have.
And yesterday I was talking to some friends in South Africa, and they said they are allowed one COVID test on Medicare, covered by their insurance, and everything else they have to pay for. And so they have to choose, when am I going to get myself tested for free?
Wow.
Because if I squander the test and get tested too soon, and then I fall sick and I need to know, then I'll have to pay for it.
That's tough.
So it's an interesting, as you say, different societies are different.
Yeah.
So we've got our first 3 questions. What am I trying to do? That's setting objectives. How much risk am I prepared to take in moving towards those objectives? That's risk appetite. And how much risk can I cope with? That's my risk capacity. And now, once we've got those as our kind of as our context, the fourth question is, well, how much risk have I actually got? What's my risk exposure? And then following that, the key question is my risk exposure less than my risk appetite and less than my risk capacity? Because if the amount of risk I face is more than my risk appetite, then I don't want to go for those goals. Maybe I've got the wrong goals.
Right.
If the amount of my risk exposure is more than my risk capacity, my ability to handle risk, then I've got a problem and I need to manage that risk. If my risk exposure is less than my risk appetite or my risk capacity, then maybe it's okay to just progress on the path that I'd originally chosen. So
Hmm.
risk exposure is an assessment of the risk that I'm actually facing whilst I'm moving towards those goals. So those are my first four questions. What am I trying to do? How much risk am I prepared to take? How much risk can I cope with? And how much risk have I got? And the fifth question is whether my risk exposure is above or below my appetite and my capacity. So what do I do if my risk exposure is above my risk appetite or my risk capacity or both? Well, this is where we have to do some risk management. And
Mm-hmm.
so the next key question is, what is my risk management capability? How able am I to manage the risks that I'm exposed to? Because if you find that the risks you're exposed to are completely outside of your control, well, then maybe you have a problem that you need to think again. If you have risks, maybe you've got a lot of risk in trying to achieve your goals, but you can manage that risk safely down to a level which makes it okay to proceed, then you're okay. And so my sixth question is, if my risk management, if my risk exposure is so high that I can't manage it, do I need to change my objectives? Am I aiming at something which is unrealistic? If I want to go out and party with all my friends, and then I find that the risk of getting infection is too high for me to bear and I can't do anything about it, then maybe I shouldn't be wanting to go out and party with my friends. If I want to launch my business into Brazil or into Europe or into, dare we say it, into China, then and I suddenly find the exposure there is too high and I can't manage it, then I need to change my objectives. So I think these 7 questions give us a natural way of thinking. We can express them in natural language. What am I trying to do? How much risk am I prepared to take? How cautious do I want to be? And then what can I cope with and what have I got? These are just natural language questions.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can put them in risk terms, setting
Yeah.
objectives, understanding our risk appetite, determining our risk capacity, and assessing our risk exposure. So you can either talk about it in normal language or in risk language, but the questions are the same.
Yeah, I love that. I love both language. Both languages. The folks who are not risk management enthusiasts like you and I can use the basic language. I think it's really awesome, David. Can I take that to use the word we use in America quite a lot? Awesome.
Awesome. Everything is awesome. No,
I'm,
please
I'm
don't use that word. I'm British, so it's quite okay. It's spiffing. Tip top.
spiffy. Okay, I'm going to take this awesome framework you got because I know some of our viewers, they're already asking about how you would do this on a project. So I'm just going to type these in, these framework questions, David, so
Yep,
that
go for that.
your channel subscribers can have this.
I was going to
And
drop them into the comments as well, or
oh, good
into
point.
the description. But we'll make sure they're available so people can see the 7 questions and then start to apply them.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll just put them in piecemeal into the chat. But
Okay.
can we go over the language again, just to ensure that we've got it down? So
Okay, so do you
what am
want
I
the risk
trying to
language?
achieve?
Shall we do it in the risk version? So
Yes, let's do
first
in
of
the
all, you
risk
set your
version.
objectives.
Mhm.
Secondly, you understand your risk appetite.
Okay.
Thirdly, you determine your risk capacity.
Okay.
Fourth, you assess your risk exposure.
Okay.
And then fifth, you determine whether or not your risk exposure is above or below your appetite and capacity.
Okay.
Sixth, we manage our risk, and that's dependent on our risk management capability. And lastly, if we can't manage our risk down to a level which is acceptable, we need to change our objectives.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
So
Let's
what should we do
advance.
now? Shall we try and put some flesh on the bones of that framework? Would that be
Please,
useful
let's
to
do that. Let's do that.
Okay, so I want to just try and address this in 3 different levels because I think risk management, as I said earlier, is a life skill. So it applies to us as individuals, and a lot of us are very individually focused at the moment. Emerging from lockdown is a personal issue for me and my health and my family. but also it affects our businesses and it affects the wider society. So I'd like to kind of take those in turn and just see how this questioning framework might help us to think through the sorts of issues that we're facing on those three different levels. So
Okay.
shall we start with the personal, because that's kind of closest to home. It's where we're most thinking at the moment.
Absolutely.
So
And we always come first before anyone else. So it's always
well,
about
yeah,
us.
businesses are made of people, societies are made of people. And, as individuals, that's the smallest component of a business or a project team or of a society. So, of course, we have to get the people right. It's people's hearts and people's minds that we need to get straight first, and
True.
then we can build from there. But that's a much bigger philosophical question. So here's the question. As lockdown restrictions are eased, for you as an individual, what do you want to do with that? What is the most important thing for you if you can go out through that locked door, if you can emerge into the world, either blinking from your cave or skipping out like the calves in the spring? What are you aiming at? So, for example, you might say, my overriding goal is to reconnect with my friends and family. That's really what I've got to do. Or you might say, do you know, I've put on a load of weight and I'm feeling really, I need to exercise. I've got to get
Mm.
my six pack going again. Or you might think, do you know, my beard and my hair, I look terrible. I need to get down to the hairdressers and go to the beauty salon and make myself gorgeous. Or maybe you need to earn some money. Or maybe your overriding objective is to protect your health. Whatever happens, I've got to stay healthy.
Mm.
And different people will have different goals.
Hmm.
So some people I know, as soon as the restrictions are slightly lifted, they're down the beach. They're
Mm.
surfing, they're swimming, they're partying with their friends, they're out, drinking in the bars, because that's the thing that they've missed most. And here's the
Interesting.
opportunity. Lockdown is eased. I'm out.
Hmm.
And I have
Hmm.
other friends who, lockdown is eased and they're saying, do you know what? I'm so concerned about my health. Maybe I'm a bit vulnerable. Perhaps I've got diabetes, or perhaps I've got a heart condition, or I've got a weak chest. I'm just going to stay put.
Hmm.
And those are your objectives, okay, to protect your health. So you can see how your behavior is driven by your objectives. So if we
Absolutely.
took those two sort of personal things, one is, I've just got to get out. I've got to get out. Let me out. Or I've really got to stay healthy. The next question then is, how much risk are you prepared to take in order to pursue those goals?
Mm.
So if you want to go and reconnect with your friends, you know, the more people you meet, the more exposed you are to the potential of infection. It just stands
Mm.
to reason. Are you prepared to take that risk? Are you going to go out wearing a face mask? Are you going to go out and stay 2 meters or 6 feet apart? Are you going to go out and wash your hands 6 times a day for 20 seconds in the way that we've all learned to do? Or will you say, I can't be doing with that. I'm just going to go and take the risk. So you have to decide what your risk appetite is in those circumstances.
Mm.
If your overriding concern is your health, there are other risks. You lose social contact, you become isolated, you get lonely, you don't have the opportunity to talk to people, to exchange ideas. You become kind of a hermit, and that's a bad thing. But if your health is the overriding concern, are you prepared to take the risk of loneliness and isolation and becoming separate from your community? And maybe you're not, or maybe you are. So we set our risk appetite based on our goals, but also based on how cautious or adventurous we want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Marco, yes, it does. Marco, who is on our chat, he just alerted me to a US law that was passed not to charge COVID patients. So I mean,
Ah,
this could affect people's perception of how much risk they really are taking, or their capacity. Should we use the word capacity?
yes, I think we
Because
should, because it's your
yeah,
financial capacity, isn't it? Can you afford,
yeah.
if you need treatment and you have to pay to be in intensive care or to get some kind of, specialist treatment, can you afford
Hmm.
it? My friends in South
Yeah.
Africa who have to pay for the second antibody test,
Wow.
have they got the funds to pay for that? Yeah, absolutely. So these are all part of the equation that we need to think
Mm.
about. And if you find that the amount of risk that you're exposed to in order to achieve your goal. So I must connect with my friends. I'm going to get down the beach and go surfing and partying and drinking in the bar because I've missed my people so much, my tribe.
Yeah.
If that level of risk is unacceptable and unmanageable, maybe you need to change your goal. So those
Gotcha.
are the kinds of risk-based thinking I'd like individuals, and it's what
Hmm.
I'm trying to do. My wife is vulnerable. She has a weakened, a compromised immune system. She's been out of the house 3 times in 10 weeks, and one of those
Wow.
was for a doctor's appointment, and the other 2 times were to just drive around the area with the top down in the car to breathe some fresh air. Didn't meet
Nice.
anybody. So that's the level of risk we're prepared to take personally.
Nice. That really addresses the personal level.
Hmm.
So, what's the next level, David?
Well, the next thing will be to think about businesses. In the UK, as you say, our government has taken some pretty radical steps to support local business or support businesses large and small. They've set up government-backed loans. They've agreed to pay the salaries of people up to a fairly low maximum if those people can't work from home. There's a fairly generous a set of arrangements. And now that's beginning to come to an end. The government here is beginning to say, that arrangement of furloughing staff, that's going to stop very soon. You're going to have to pay for your people. And you
Hmm.
either pay for them to stay at home or you pay for them to go to work. And we can support you so far, but no further. And so those kinds of things, those sort of decisions are beginning to be made by businesses. And you have a business, I have a business, a lot of my friends have businesses. Those businesses are dormant. We've lost our customers. We've lost that kind of marketing pipeline. We've lost a lot of our supply chain. Some of
Yeah.
our supply chain's gone out of business. Some of our customers have gone out of business, or they're not operating at the moment. So what's my goal as a business? Is it just to survive and hang on? Is it to come out of lockdown fully formed and back to normal, whatever that may be, and operating exactly as we were before? Is my goal maybe to operate on a slimmed down basis, more agile, more flexible, using more working from home, using more remote channels, and maybe operate in a different way out in the marketplace? What am I trying to do with my business? And once we know what we're trying to do, then we can step into the rest of the risk-based set of questions to say, okay, how much risk am I prepared to take to achieve that? What can I cope with? What have I got? And what can I manage? Which are the other questions that we've got. So I have a friend with a small business. They make high-end kitchens. He
Okay.
has a team of about 15 really skilled cabinet makers and woodworkers and fitters and designers, graphic artists, all sorts of people, and some admin on his team. And they're all at home. They haven't worked for 10 weeks. And he hasn't had to pay them because of the government scheme.
Hmm.
He thinks he wants to put them back to work on Monday, but now he has to find work for them to do. All of his clients who want kitchens,
Wow.
they don't have any money. They don't have jobs. They're unsure about the future. Are they going to want to pay quite a lot of money for a high-end bespoke designed kitchen or not? And so
Hmm.
if he takes his people back to work and relaunches his business and the work isn't there, he could sink the business.
Yeah.
So he has to decide how much risk he's prepared to take in order to re-establish his business, get his team together, maintain those skills, rebuild the momentum of his team to be operating again. And that's a risk decision. And it's
Hmm.
a really tough one to think about.
Indeed. I'm just thinking, David, of how we discuss negative risks or threats versus positive risks or opportunities. Is it right to, at the same time, while reviewing the negative risks or threats, to think about any way your friend could leverage any opportunities, hidden benefits of sorts?
Phil, you know the answer to that question. You're just teasing me, aren't you? How dare you suggest that risk doesn't include both threats and opportunities? Of course it does.
You bit the
Uh,
bait.
it's so basic to recognize that there's upside risk as well as downside risk.
Because you
And
know what, David, a lot of people just focus on the negative, and that's a mindset we need to help them
it
move away
is.
from.
I recorded a little 8-minute video, which you can find on the Risk Doctor Video YouTube channel, it's about whether or not the coronavirus is a black swan or a risk or something else. And
Mm.
towards the end of that little 8-minute video, I talk about upside and downside risks at personal business and societal levels. And of course, there are opportunities, huge opportunities for us as we step out into a new normal. A lot of people have talked about the pandemic being an opportunity to reset, to say, okay, you know, we've been flying so much and we've been going all around the world for meetings and driving our cars all the time, not thinking about it. Now we've had maybe 3 months with no international travel, with very little car travel, with no no personal meetings, in-person meetings. When we reset, do we really want all that international travel again? Can we not let the earth breathe a little bit? Do we really need to be meeting together in big conferences? Why don't we do it online? Do we really need to be driving our car all the time? How about cycling or walking? You know, some of these things, there are some real health benefits, some business benefits, and some societal benefits that we could take if we see them and if we take action now to grasp them. If we don't take action now, of course, the whole thing with the risk management is to be proactive. If we're not proactive now, those opportunities will just fade away, and we'll find we're back in the old normal, and it'll be as bad as it was before. So yes, of course, there are opportunities, both for my friend in his business, but also for us personally and for us as society.
Yes, yes. Very
So
good,
maybe we
David.
should just wrap up by talking about some of those society level things as well,
Yeah,
because I think that's
absolutely.
really important.
Absolutely.
I was part of a project run by one of our think tanks in the UK called the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA. And this must be about 10 years ago, when we were thinking about the public's attitude to failure. And I edited a book called The Failure Files, thinking about from a business and a personal and a corporate and a social perspective, all sorts of different areas, how we approach failure. And is failure a bad thing or a good thing? Is it a learning opportunity? Does it give us information that we can use to move forward in a different direction? Or is it just, we got it wrong, we need to be hit over the head, and we should hang our heads in shame? And you know, that the goal of that major project was to see if we could raise the optimism level or the realism level of British society, and to think, you know what, we're not so bad. We can actually do better in the world. We can change our world and other people's worlds, and we just need to think about it in a different way. And I think we have the same opportunity here. So we have learned in our society to value our key workers, to say not just nurses and doctors, but the guys who empty the trash cans, the bins, the garbage men, the ladies who serve as the checkout in the supermarket, you know, all sorts of people, the guy who delivers the mail. These are key workers who have been invisible before, and now we appreciate them. Now we clap our hands for them in the UK. 8 o'clock every Thursday night, we're out there clapping and cheering for our key workers. Will that continue? Is that something that we want to build into our society, to value key workers, maybe pay them a little bit more? What about compassion and kindness? There's a huge amount of random acts of kindness, people sharing with their neighbours, going shopping for them, checking up on them, phoning to see if they're okay. And a lot more interaction on the streets when you do see someone. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you out. Isn't it a wonderful day? Instead of just passing by as we used to. Will we keep that? Is there an opportunity to have a kinder society, a society which is more compassionate, more respectful, more tolerant? I think there could be, if we see it and if we work towards it as an objective, using this kind of risk-based framework. If that's what we want, how are we going to achieve it? What risks are there involved in trying to reach that new society that we want to have? Can we manage them? And if we were to manage them, what would it look like on the other side? So I would be really optimistic in terms of a reset for our national society and communities here in the UK, in the US, around the world individually, but also more widely, globally, thinking about the way that nations cooperate together.
Right.
The way that we think about climate change and the environment, the way that we think about international trade, the way that we think about finance, all of these things, international aid and development. You know, we can do things better and differently. And now that we've all had this pause of 3 months to stop and think, how do we want to come out of this? As we emerge from lockdown as a society, as a nation, as a world together, where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? I'm quite excited about it.
I am as well, David. And to be really honest with you, I see the engagement level of leadership in different countries going up. I mean, now they're showing up for once, like on the regular, like almost daily, which I find to be quite refreshing just to see them show up. And I just hope it continues the level of engagement to actually feel that they are leaders.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times leaders, they kind of get by without showing up and giving their people breakdowns of what's going on. But not
Exactly.
so. Like here in the United States, we've had mayors, governors, presidential level showing up more than usual. I
Yeah,
think that's really
absolutely.
great. That's
The
really
level of
great.
communication has improved. Now, whether the quality of the communication
Mm.
is where it should be, that's another question. But
That's
we
another.
won't go there just now.
let's
So, look, has that
let's
been
let's leave
useful
it.
in terms of laying out this thinking framework, 7
Mhm.
questions, and showing how it applies to us as individuals coming out of lockdown, as businesses trying to re-emerge and restart our businesses, and as societies thinking about how we might want to be different moving forward? Do you think this 7 question framework is useful?
It is absolutely useful, David. And I couldn't help notice, forgive me for my being a PMBOK geek, but I couldn't help notice that we have 7 processes in the PMBOK guide, which you authored chapter 11 pretty much.
Mm.
There's 7 there. Do these 7 correlate? Is there like some, you know, transformation over
Uh,
to,
I
or
think
not
it's
quite?
probably a bit more of a coincidence. So I
Is
should say I
it?
didn't author the whole chapter. I was responsible for a team of 4 risk management experts, 20 other contributors, and
Yes,
100 reviewers. So it's
that's
not
true.
my own personal work, but I buy into it absolutely. No, I think the
Yes.
7, 7 is a magic number, isn't it? It appears all sorts of in all sorts of 7 days of the week and all sorts of different settings. So I some of them are the same.
Okay.
So the first one, obviously, setting objectives, but others I think are different.
So
No,
how much risk am I prepared to take in pursuing these goals? Would you say that comes even before? That's more like pre-project, like
exactly. So that is
EMV.
in our business case, in our project charter. The project sponsor should be defining for a project how much risk do we want to take in order to achieve our project goals, and that's what we then translate into our
Hmm.
definitions of impact against different objectives. So how much
Mm.
money, how much time, how much performance, how much regulatory compliance, how much safety, where is our threshold, which is defined by the risk appetite for the whole project.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
these are much bigger questions, as you've seen, than just projects. Here we're talking
Absolutely.
about where we're going as a society and as a world, as well as where I'm going individually once I get that door unlocked.
Much bigger. Absolutely. So let's go through these so we've got them firm in our minds. 1, what am I trying to achieve? 2, how much risk am I prepared to take in pursuing these goals? 3, how much risk can I cope with? 4, how much risk have I got? 5, is risk exposure less than risk capacity? In other words, a risk assessment. 6, can I manage my risk to get and stay within my risk appetite and risk capacity? We call that risk management capability. And 7, if not, how can I change my objectives? I think that's really the crux of the matter,
You
because we
got it.
don't want to go down a dark alley and get hit.
Right. And sometimes our goals are unrealistic and, we're aiming at the wrong thing. And this set of questions can actually show us that. I might want to do something either personally or for my business, which is completely unrealistic. And once I start thinking about how much risk is associated with that and how much risk I can cope with, and I see the mismatch, then I realized, you know what, maybe I ought to be aiming at something different. And that's a very useful kind of review for us to do as individuals and as businesses, and from time to time as whole societies.
Absolutely, David. Well, thank you so much for this pleasure of being able to pick your brain. I wanted to hear from you what you had to think about this. I mean, in my mind, what Boris was doing, whatever good or bad, should have been reviewed from this lens, because I guess he, hindsight is 2020 for him as well. Having got it, he could probably look back and say, what did I do wrong? What should I have done? Should I have worn a
Mm,
mask? Should I have done gloves? But for me, let me just speak for myself. I do the mask, I do the gloves still. Like I said, I have not emerged. I'm looking at my risk capability, and I'm looking at my risk capacity. I'm looking at the, my opportunities and the
yes.
threats. And to me, it's just not worth it enough for me to go all the way out there. Someone in my office had COVID. And when I heard that, I stayed away from the office.
Sure.
I'm still
And I think
staying
it's
away.
important for us as individuals not to judge others, to say that's your risk position. I have a different risk position because I have different objectives, I have different risk capacity, and I have a different risk management capability. So someone wants to be cautious, that's absolutely fine. That's their right to do that. A business wants to come out in a much smaller format and operate at a quarter of the capacity that they had before. That's absolutely fine. And if somebody else wants to go out and they really feel that they've got the wherewithal to launch their business into a new area, good for them. Let them go. But we need to respect one another and not to say, you're just a coward, Phil, staying at home. You need to man up and get out there because you've done a proper risk assessment and decided you're not prepared to take that risk. Well,
Right.
fair play and good luck to you.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, in the news, without getting into names, one person was called a coward for not putting on a mask. And in my mind, I'm like, I think one just has to be responsible for themselves. People have got children, they've got families, they've got vulnerable people, and they don't want to step out there and put them in harm's way. So it's totally understandable. David, we got a question in from one of our viewers, and I just want to ask this really quick. What could be the impact of the current situation on outsourced activities, considering that some of the common outsourcing sites like India have been under strict lockdown? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think what I want to do, Phil, I'll answer the question, but I'd like to just kind of wrap it up fairly soon so that we don't dilute the focus on this framework that we've developed.
Absolutely.
So now the key thing is we've got the framework, we see how it applies, we've restated the framework. Let's kind of just go away and think about that. And clearly, here's a specific application area. And I think, again, the framework, you just step through it and you say, okay, why do I want to do outsourcing? Is it in order to share skills with other people so that I broaden the ability? Is it to give somebody else in another country or somewhere else a job? Is it just to cut my costs? Is it to undercut the competition? And what am I trying to achieve here? And then is the approach I'm taking appropriate or not? And I think we can challenge all of these questions. Sometimes outsourcing is a great thing to do because the skills elsewhere are available, they're higher quality, and they're giving somebody a job that they otherwise wouldn't have. And so for that reason, outsourcing is great. At other times, it's just a way to cut costs and cut quality and cut corners. And so I think I wouldn't want to say, and I certainly wouldn't want to comment specifically on India as a venue, whether we insource, outsource, offshore, inshore, all those things are quite complex risk-based questions to answer.
Indeed. And, just to hammer home the point, David, I think you're right. These 7 steps, for those that are just coming, we have the 7 steps in the chat, and the 7th step ends with, if my risk dimensions are not aligned, what should I do? How can I change my objectives? So we'd like to leave you guys on that thoughts. Any final comments, David?
No, well, I think just to say, you'd expect the risk doctor to take a risk-based perspective on most things in life. In this case, I think the whole question about emerging from lockdown is about risk. How much risk is out there on the other side of that locked door? How much risk am I prepared to take? And I think I'm hoping that this simple framework will help us to answer those questions, or at least think about those questions in a structured way, so that we're not paralyzed by uncertainty or paralyzed by anxiety, but we're able to move forward in a considered and proactive way. So let's not be afraid of what's on the other side of the locked door as we emerge from lockdown. Let's keep our eyes open, keep our spirits up. Let's step out there, understanding the risks that we're taking and being prepared to take the right risks safely.
And with that, thank you so much, David, for the time. Our viewers on the Risk Doctor video channel, Praision channel, those of you who joined us, thank you very much. We can see you've asked questions. We will be taking those questions and putting them into the comments, and Dr. David Hillson
I'll
will
answer
get
them in the
back to you.
comments. Absolutely. I'll make sure that when I see them in the comments, I'll reply to them in that place so we can all see them.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Take care and speak to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.